This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for Tuesday, April 24th, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cuboids?
Cristina Roach.
Hey everyone.
And producer Pat.
Hi, checkers.
We have a great show for you today. Cristina is going to look into whether nature documentaries are fake. Adam is going to talk to us about vasectomies.
That's right.
But first, I'm going to talk to you about snake bites. I'm currently reading Steven Pinker's book Enlightenment now, and one of the chapters, spoiler alert, he mentions that snake bites kill tens of thousands of people each year. What? I had no idea it was this high. Wondered if this was true, and thought it would make a nice short segment. And here we are. While thinking about the topic, I couldn't help but remember an amusing exchange from Douglas Adams' book Last Chance to See, where he speaks to an Australian researcher about deadly snakes. He asked, "What do you do if you get bitten by one?" To which the researcher replied, "You die, you idiot. That's what deadly means." So what does a good old search of the internet reveal? Well, an article in The Telegraph from 2008 has this alarming headline: "Snakes kill more than 90,000 around the world."
Wow.
But then its subheadline was, "Poisonous snakes could be killing more than 90,000 people around the world, new research has shown." I know, like, come on, the subheadline is so much better than the headline.
The
It's pretty funny.
subheadline, it's like the reply to the tweet where someone corrects it and never gets tweeted, you know?
This happened, this might have happened. Like,
And to think people don't read beyond that colon and those two spaces in that
I know.
headline, too.
Good point, Cristina. Always look beyond the colon. The Telegraph article describes the work of researchers led by Professor Yanaka De Silva in Sri Lanka. The article states, quote, "In total, between 1.2 million and 5.5 million snake bites may occur annually, scientists have estimated. Only a quarter of these result in envenoming, the injection of poison into the bloodstream from a snake's fangs. That's quite a range, but good to know that a snake's bite isn't always going to lead to poison in your bloodstream." The article also provides the corresponding numbers that go with the range that I just mentioned. Globally, the researchers calculated that, quote, "at least 421,000 envenomings and 20,000 snake bite deaths occur each year, but the figures could be as high as 1.8 million envenomings and 94,000 deaths." The World Health Organization has a snake bite fact sheet from 2015, so a bit more recent, where they say up to 5 million people are bitten by snakes every year.
Wow.
Of which they estimate 2.4 million envenomations, which is about half, which is different than the quarter that was mentioned in the original study, and 94,000 to 125,000 deaths annually, with an additional 400,000 amputations and other severe health consequences such as infection, tetanus, scarring, contractures, and psychological issues. Poor access to health care and scarcity of antivenom increases the severity of injuries and their outcomes.
Seems to be a very wide range of side effects, ranging from, like, amputation that's really bad to some that are just
Right.
a nuisance, but not life-altering.
As you can kind of imagine, if a snake bites you in a certain place, a certain part of your body, and how much access to medical care you have, you'll have a huge range of outcomes.
Yeah.
I wonder why we don't hear about this much. Well, a CDC report found that in the United States, about 7,000 to 8,000 people per year receive venomous bites, and about 5 of those people die. There's even a Wikipedia page with the names of everyone who has died from snake bites in the United States going back decades.
Wow.
For comparison, that same World Health Organization fact sheet lists U.S. deaths from dog bites at 10 to 20. So dogs are killing 2 to 4 times as many people as snakes in the United States. That said, people often hear about shark attacks. And in a 55-year period ending recently, less than 1 American died from a shark attack each year.
Yeah.
Now, in Canada, an article from 2016 indicated there are about 300 bites a year with 0 deaths. That's why we don't really hear about them much at all.
Well, they're probably just less venomous.
I'm not quite sure that's the case. I think we just have greater access to healthcare.
The idea that access to healthcare has something to do with it kind of blows my original idea out of the water, because I would have thought Australia, for sure.
That's coming up. Just wait 1 second.
Yeah.
Now, Western and Central Europe are similar to the United States with 5 and 6 deaths, and Eastern Europe has 37. I would have thought Australia, as Pat just mentioned, would have many more, but there's actually 4 or less each year. But they also have a much smaller population. So if you picture Australia, 20 to 25 million people, the United States about 315 million people, obviously there is a greater risk if you're in Australia. I mean, just in general, down there, you know.
Or they just get killed by all the other crazy animals
Exactly.
in Australia first.
Exactly. So where are all the deaths then?
India.
Oh, what's left? Yeah, the majority are in Africa and Southeast Asia and then Latin America. India seems to have the most, and that is likely related to its large population. And, of course, the snakes that bite people and the lack of access to healthcare.
Yeah.
Right.
And apparently when people do die in the States and other places in more developed countries, there's alcohol often is involved, and people may just not seek medical care.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It'll work itself out. Don't worry about it. Now, there's not that much one can do if you're poor and working in a field in a poor country and you have snakes around. But to reduce deaths, it's better to wear protective clothing if possible and have access to antivenom and medical care is basically the large reason there's so few deaths in so many places.
So it's just like living somewhat close to a hospital, having transportation to be able to get to the hospital if something happens.
Well, you have to imagine, A, there's a hospital in the first place. B, the hospital actually has the antivenom that is appropriate to the snakes in that area. And, C, there's enough antivenom to go around for people being bitten by snakes.
Yeah. Things that we kind of take for granted. I take for granted that if I get rushed into an emergency room in the hospital with something, they'll
have everything you need.
Deal with it,
right? I don't imagine I'll get bitten by a snake. I imagine if I do, it'll work out for me. Versus, you have 5 minutes. What? That does happen in some very deadly situations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you ever been watching a snake nature documentary and thought, that's a guy's hand in a puppet? Well, Cristina is here to tell you you're right. Isn't that correct, Cristina?
What is correct is that a few months ago I did a segment on game farm photography. As a quick refresher, generally game farms are businesses that keep genetically wild animals captive. They earn income from staging photos for photographers with these animals. Now, some are hobbyists and others are commercial photographers trying to get money shots that wildlife photographers can take weeks under dangerous or uncomfortable conditions to get. Now, if you guys remember, I posted a photo in our show doc to get your reaction. It was of a wolf and a bear fighting over a dead deer.
Yeah,
it was a pretty dramatic photo. Blood all over the snow. Now, that photo was posted by at least a couple of mainstream newspapers before it came out that it was staged at a game farm. As you can imagine, many people have problems with these places, from captive animals to photographers misrepresenting the origin of their photos. If you haven't heard the segment, check it out, episode 477 for the full scoop. Okay, so fake nature photos, check. What about fake nature documentaries? Now, I can already hear people gasping, please don't ruin the Planet Earth series for me. I include myself in that. It's going to be okay. Now, around this time last year, a filmmaker named Simon Cade made a video that went viral about tricks that nature documentaries employ to keep people watching. The description read, everyone loves BBC's Planet Earth, but how much of it is real? Now, he isn't the first to make this observation about nature docs. A classic and well-known example, Disney's 1958 documentary, White Wilderness, where producers perpetuated an urban legend that lemmings jump off cliffs to commit mass suicide when their numbers increase too much. In truth, the producers bought the lemmings, shipped them to the filming location, and unethically forced them to jump into the water. The doc even won an Oscar, but a CBC investigation in 1982 exposed the scene for being fake.
It's a lot of years between the film you made.
It is. Yeah.
That reminds me of this guy, Elon, I heard on some podcast, do a review of Super Size Me, because he was so outraged he had to wait multiple years for his anger to die down to review it.
Okay, so to be fair, the article stresses most nature documentarians have nothing but the best intentions. But considering the length of time it takes to film animals in their natural habitat, it doesn't seem a stretch that some filmmakers take shortcuts. In 2015, Huffington Post ran a story titled, "These are some of the sketchy ways nature documentaries are actually filmed." HuffPost spoke with filmmaker and author of 2 books on fakery in wildlife programs, Chris Palmer. He said they may go out with determination to get the actual footage, but after a couple of days, when you've got nothing, when you've got 24 hours left, the money's running out, you get kind of desperate because you've got to put food on the table, you've got to look after your family, send kids to college. It's a real ethical dilemma, end quote. Now, he's not exaggerating. A 2009 study of the ethics behind wildlife documentaries published in the Center for Media and Social Impact provided, quote, a map of perceived ethical challenges that documentary filmmakers, directors, and producer directors in the United States identify in the practice of their craft. It's very comprehensive, but in a nutshell, this report reveals profound ethical conflicts informing the daily work of documentarians. This was a little bit shocking to me. An example, Palmer cites his colleague Tom Campbell, who towed a fake seal behind a boat to attract sharks. Another example, producers who staged interactions between predator and prey using trained animals by tucking candy, like jelly beans and M&Ms, in carcasses. So like roadkill. And sometimes this is acknowledged in an end credit, but there's no obvious disclaimer about it. So other issues, some close-up shots are actually game farm rented or zoo animals. Nearly every shot of small animals in a BBC documentary called Hidden Kingdoms, for instance, was apparently done in an enclosed habitat. There was a scandal in the industry in 2011 when BBC's series Frozen Planet was purported to include footage of a captive polar bear cub in the Holland Zoo. So popular shows like Planet Earth are made without CGI. I was very relieved to hear that. But some documentaries do use it without disclaimers to illustrate scenes like, many turtles making a long voyage. They also create narratives of a mother and calf humpback whale making a 3,000-mile trek from Hawaii to Alaska when, in truth, they're using footage of several mom and cub whales. Some producers set up hunt scenes where prey have little chance of survival, and others make animals look more dangerous, like feeding sharks chum to create a feeding frenzy. Now, one major problem in the field is that networks put pressure on filmmakers to capture amazing nature footage in unreasonable amounts of time. So we're talking days. Another issue is that filmmakers are surprisingly not asked about how they get their shots, no matter how crazy they are. Palmer says in the article that many filmmakers find out when bad stuff happens in the field through anecdotal evidence spread by word of mouth. But that's not quite what Simon Cade's video is about. He walks viewers through ethical techniques and artistic liberties documentarians use to ensure a nature documentary can compete for audience attention alongside Hollywood blockbusters. Okay, are you guys ready? I'll ask you, Darren and Adam, first, since Pat has an edge because of his expertise with audio stuff. Have you guys ever considered the sounds you hear in a documentary and where they come from? Maybe you've never thought about it before, which is cool too, but...
Well, right off, I'd say the soundtrack's probably not totally genuine. I guess I don't usually think about it, but when I watch a real movie, I always assume almost any sound is done in post.
Right.
And you can kind of tell because when you actually put a camera outside, all you hear is... It's terrible.
Yeah.
So
It's pretty fun.
but no, I never really thought about it for a nature doc.
Darren?
It's a good question, Cristina, and I'm somewhat similar to Adam, that I do think about it sometimes, but I think while I'm watching a nature documentary, I typically don't think about that. I'm usually more attuned to the visual, so I often think that they're editing it in a certain way to create a narrative. I usually don't think the footage is false, but I do think I'm like, really? You got that snake going exactly in that direction? And I often think, how did they get all these shots? And I know some of it is motion-sensitive cameras all over the place, but when there's like one that seems to follow a particular animal, either some primate in the trees or some aquatic species, I'm like, how are they actually doing this? Anyway, so that's what I think about. I think about the visual more than the audio.
Now, Pat?
So the audio is almost always certainly fake in my mind. I mean, I suspend that when I watch a nature doc, the same way that I don't believe that Christopher Reeve can fly. Mm-hmm. I know that that's not the sound it's making. Now, they probably use parabolic mics for some of it. They could pick up sounds, but like it's not realistic to think.
Can you explain what a parabolic mic is?
So a parabolic mic is a mic that you can train on something far away in the hopes of picking up those sounds. In the film industry, Foley artists have a career for a reason.
Yeah, that's true. Now, Kate explains it's really difficult to record sound when you are far away from something. Cameras can zoom in, but the microphones can't. Nature filmographers often use telescopic lenses or shots filmed from the air. He uses, as an example, footage of a wolf hunting, but if we're hearing the native audio recording, what you'd hear is a loud helicopter rotor. So filmmakers need to add sounds to the scene that mimic what you'd hear if a microphone was wired to an animal, which, of course, is not possible. BBC admitted to using sound effects in Planet Earth 2, citing the limited range of microphones when many viewers took to socials to complain about it. The network said sounds were recreated to, quote, create a sense of a wild place as well as emotion and drama. So people were tweeting, I love this and I love the cinematography, but I can't handle the fake soundtrack because they, it's like a millipede's pitter patter on the leaf. It was that intense.
What bugs me the most is that I usually don't think the violins are there in the environment at the time.
Now, a BBC spokesperson told The Sun range and ambient noise ensure quite a lot of wild sounds simply cannot be recorded in the field. As a result, wildlife filmmakers often turn to sound designers to recreate something that sounds like it would in the wild, a soundtrack that is true to nature. Now, to something that Darren alluded to earlier, nature docs also manipulate footage to create a narrative or play out a scenario. Filming wild animals is challenging and unpredictable, so it can take up to months for filmmakers to get enough footage to work with. So it should be no surprise to all of us that they edit footage taken at various times to create a sequence of events that plays out like a great story. One example Kate gives is capturing a serious kangaroo fight, which took weeks of very boring kangaroo footage.
Because they just don't fight that often? Was that kind of the problem?
They were all just hanging out. Now, narratives are created for emotional impact. So there's a baby kangaroo hiding out in its mom's pouch, and then you pan to two male kangaroos sizing each other up, then back to the mom kangaroo. Those shots could have been filmed days apart, but it makes for a more exciting and engaging scene. It's no different than what Pixar's done, humanizing animals, and then, to your point, add a musical score to that and you're knocking back the popcorn. Now, this may leave some of you a little disappointed or misled, but to suggest that nature documentaries are fake is an overstatement. We know reality TV is not exactly reality. We just don't give much thought that nature documentaries use techniques to influence the way we see wildlife until it becomes obvious, and that's pretty much how all of you guys answered. But let's be honest, if nature documentaries were just boring facts and footage with droning narrators, would anyone watch?
Right. Probably. It's not a lot of people.
It's not a lot of people. Well, definitely not 12.26 million views, which is the debut episode of Planet Earth 2's stats. And that was 40.9% of the television viewing public. That's pretty incredible.
Where?
In the UK.
Okay.
Now, as Kate says, storytelling is what engages us, not facts and figures. And so what some people could see as fakery becomes something we can actually learn from. That's actually his direct quote. Now, for me, in the back of my mind, again, I realize nature docs aren't actual real-time nonfiction depictions of nature playing out. But like you, Pat, what you said, I certainly kind of suspend my belief about it because I know I'm seeing real footage. Now, Sir David Attenborough says, there is precious little that is natural in any film. You distort speed if you want to show things like plants growing, or look in detail at the way an animal moves. You distort light levels, you distort distribution in the sense that you see dozens of different species in a jungle within a few minutes, which is something you brought up earlier, Darren, so that the places seem teeming with life. You distort size by using close-up lenses, and you distort sound. What the filmmaker is trying to do is to convey a particular experience. A good outcome of all of this is that the BBC, for example, now provides ethics training for its wildlife producers, and other networks should definitely follow suit to ensure footage is captured in an ethical, animal-friendly way, yet still gives an honest representation of wildlife.
So how can an ethical film producer or, documentary team compete with something that's unethical and potentially that much more engaging?
I would say that's a good point, Adam. They probably can't unless the whole sort of industry changes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that line about time lapse. No one's like, hey, flowers don't grow that quickly. Right. This is junk. How are those clouds moving that quickly? Oh, how can you see at night? You can't see things at night. Oh, you're using fake cameras that can look at infrared. I mean, once you start allowing, like, okay, this is a construction to convey an idea, or at least even information you wouldn't otherwise get, you can enjoy it.
Yeah.
Well, and so on not as grand a scale, a little peek behind the curtain, when you hear TRC every week, it may not be exactly the conversation that took place.
What?
Unless you listen to the older episodes, and maybe it is.
Well, if Christina's revelations weren't traumatic enough, Adam's going to talk to us about vasectomies.
That's right, Darren. Last week, I had a vasectomy. Following the birth of my daughter, who joined my wife and her 2 sons, it seemed wise family planning to get a permanent birth control method. This was a relatively simple and painless procedure, which I would classify as less severe than at least 3 dental surgeries I've had in my life. That said, a lot of men have serious concerns and reservations about the procedure, so I wanted to explore what it is and maybe demystify it a bit. While I consider vasectomies to be a fairly low-risk, non-invasive procedure, that certainly doesn't mean I'm advocating taking the decision lightly. A vasectomy is a method of sterilization, which should be done only if you're sure you don't want to have any more children. Younger men undergoing a vasectomy before 30 are significantly more likely to regret the decision or attempt a reverse vasectomy. That's something that's possible, but it doesn't always work, and that's much more serious surgery. A study showed that men in their 20s were 12.5 times more likely to undergo a vasectomy reversal. So one should ask themselves if they can envision a life change which would make them want to have children again. One might not, for example, want to imagine not being in their current relationship. However, breakups and divorce are extremely common, so such a thing should probably be considered. So, what exactly is a vasectomy? Well, it's a type of surgery to cause sterilization. It involves cutting, sealing, or tying the vas deferens, which prevents sperm from entering the urethra, which therefore avoids having sperm exit the penis and go into the vagina, which causes a sexual partner to get pregnant. The vas deferens is pretty much just a conduit to move sperm. I guess a more important question is, what isn't a vasectomy? It isn't at all the same as castration, in which the testicles are completely removed or otherwise deactivated. A castration, like a vasectomy, causes sterilization, but it also significantly reduces production of certain hormones such as testosterone. Castration in an adult male will greatly reduce or eliminate sex drive. It can cause mood changes and depression, though these may be psychological results of the physical changes rather than anything directly related to the brain. It can cause a reduction in strength and muscle mass, cause a decrease in body hair, and there are some benefits. It prevents male pattern baldness and could potentially add years to one's life. Now, from the way some men talk about a vasectomy, it really seems like they're worried about something equivalent to or like castration. Since a vasectomy only affects the vas deferens, it isn't at all the same as removing the testes or testicles or in some way affecting their function. Testicles remain, and the Leydig cells in the testicles continue to produce testosterone and other hormones. These are delivered into the bloodstream as they were before the procedure. Sperm is a negligible part of the seminal fluids produced during ejaculation, which continues after a vasectomy. So there really is no noticeable difference to anyone but a microscope or, potentially, an unfertilized egg. Simply put, all of the medical side effects from castration, short of sterility, just do not happen with a vasectomy. So that seems to be a concern that a lot of people have. It's going to decrease my sex drive or something like that. Not really something that's going to happen. Now, vasectomy is a type of surgery, and with any surgery, there are potential side effects, potential complications. Now, these usually include bleeding, bruising, or potential infections. Now, I visited Dr. Weiss in Ottawa. He's well known for a no-scalpel vasectomy, and there's people that will perform a similar type of surgery in a lot of big cities. Now, this is a simple procedure with less bleeding and therefore less complications than a traditional vasectomy. He recently did his 50,000th vasectomy, so there are many people here in the city who have had a positive experience with him.
That's a lot.
That is a lot of people if you consider Ottawa has about 1 million people. 50,000 people got a vasectomy from this guy. That's a pretty big number. Now, my experience has been good. I did this last Thursday. Today we're Tuesday. The procedure was done in a few minutes, and after waiting 50 minutes afterwards to make sure I didn't have any issues, I drank my Coca-Cola and was on my way. While a vasectomy doesn't need to be done in a hospital, some people do it that way, and I've heard people complain about infections, swelling, and complications in the days or weeks after surgery. A lot of these are people who didn't have the no-scalpel method. Most people who I've talked to who have visited Dr. Wise have had nothing but good things to say. It's not to say that none of these people have complications.
So I'll interrupt Adam and say that I had a scalpel vasectomy maybe 5 years ago. And it was not a terrible experience, but it was certainly a more painful, and my recovery was longer than what you've described.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 5 days out. I wouldn't say I've had any pain. Maybe discomfort would be a better. It's like I rode a bicycle for a little too long. That's kind of how I feel. And I've heard of people sitting with bags of peas between their legs for days and stuff like that. So your experience may vary, and it may vary with how you get it done. But still, I don't think in any case it's going to be a hugely terrible experience unless you have some serious complications. Now, one longer-term potential effect is post-vasectomy pain syndrome. Now, this is a short or long-term pain in the genitals caused by back pressure in the vas deferens. And while this is somewhat common, some numbers stating it to be around 15 to 30%. Within a year of the procedure, this goes down to 5% or less on the longer term. This becomes hard to quantify, as in many cases the pain is not troublesome, while in other extreme cases it can have quite an impact. So, when you get numbers like 4 or 5%, it sounds like a lot, but how much of this 4 or 5% are people that are like, well, yeah, I kind of notice and I feel, and it's a mild discomfort, but it's, it's not stopping me from enjoying sex or anything like that. Well, some studies have suggested a link between vasectomies and prostate cancer. This link is weak enough that it's possibly a statistical fluke, and other studies have not shown the link at all. Now, one potential explanation is that men who get vasectomies are more likely to seek medical help and therefore are simply diagnosed at a slightly higher rate than men who aren't getting vasectomies.
Yeah, good point.
Critical thinking.
Yeah, it's important to think about these kind of things. All considered, though, a vasectomy is a very simple procedure compared to the female equivalent, or not really equivalent, tubal ligation, or, as it's also known, getting one's tubes tied. This is a major surgery that is often done in full anesthetic, takes much more time to recover, and potentially has more significant side effects. Obviously, no single person has the option of doing one or the other, but should a couple be looking for a long-term sterilization option, the male vasectomy is generally a better idea than the female tubal ligation. The downside for the woman, of course, being that her partner getting a vasectomy just means that she won't get pregnant from having intercourse with that one person. Obviously, people always like to think that they're going to be in their current relationship forever, so that kind of solution seems to be one that will last forever, but, that is something potentially to consider. Now, all this is not to say that these are the only two forms of birth control. Condoms are useful not just as a contraceptive, but also to protect against STDs or STIs, which a vasectomy does nothing to help with. The oral contraceptive pill is a common method for women, but there are a number of side effects to this which vary with different pills and the patient. So if a man is hesitating to get a vasectomy because of potential complications, consider that, if your partner is taking an oral contraceptive, that's not a completely no strings, no consequence method of birth control.
Mm-hmm. Those things get complicated as your partner gets older, and the longer that she takes it.
Yeah, especially if you smoke, if you drink alcohol.
Right.
I remember my doctor saying magic number is 40.
Yeah. A vasectomy is a pretty safe and simple method of sterilization for men with few side effects. A lot of concerns men have about the procedure are probably unfounded, but ultimately, I can't expect to understand what worries every single person. For some, it may simply be a psychological reaction to a loss of fertility, which is linked to virility. That said, a lot of the other signs of virility aren't really going to be affected by this procedure. Ultimately, the vasectomy will not otherwise affect sexual performance or hormones, which would otherwise change one's body or mind. If you're considering getting the procedure done, I would certainly recommend trying to find someone who will do a quick and painless no-scalpel version like the one offered by Dr. Wise here in Ottawa. Such a service is not offered in every city, but even if it's not close to you, it might be worth a bit of a trip to have a better recovery.
Before you got the vasectomy, Adam, did you ever think of freezing your sperm just in case you wanted another kid?
It wasn't something I wanted to do, I'm getting fairly old, so I'm good with the one baby. Even if there was a drastic life change that I do not hope for or anticipate in my life. But I did see some recommendations for that in some of the reading I did, and that was basically because the other options for someone who wants to have a child later are either a reverse vasectomy, which is a painful, expensive, intrusive procedure that often doesn't work, or you can do in vitro fertilization because the sperm is still there. It just doesn't sort of get out. So you can go in and get it.
Interesting.
Interesting.
I'd never heard that before.
But freezing your sperm and then doing sort of a cheap and simple insemination that way is certainly a more cost-effective way of potentially having a child down the line.
Well, thank you, Adam, and thanks for joining us once again, listeners. I covered some startling facts about snake bites, which kill possibly 100,000 people each year. Cristina showed us that some nature documentaries aren't that fake, but all of them seem a little fake, which is a bit sad, but, they look great, so get over it. Adam explored the world of vasectomies from a personal level. I guess anecdote is data in this case, and that was interesting. Thank you for sharing, Adam. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smartassy.
We'll talk to you next week, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
By Professor Janaka De Silva in Sri Lanka. I don't know if I liked how I said that. Janaka De Silva.
I don't think Janaka liked it either.
I think that's an outtake for Cristina.